So the question that came through for this week is, when we face rejection, defeats, and the pounding of inferior ego, how do we pick ourselves up with knowledge and devotion? During these times, it's hard to see divinity as you are so caught up, involved, and take rejection and inferiority as truth. When this happens with someone you care for, the rejection is unexpected and seems harder. How does one face this? Okay, so a really pertinent question, because this is something that we all face at some point. First thing I'd say is forget divinity. It's too abstract. So what do I mean by that? What we're trying to do is return ourselves back to a state of balance. So we need to get ourselves somewhere that is tangible. If we are feeling the pounding of inferior ego, if we're feeling rejected, defeated, moving from there to a space where we can conceive of and begin to feel divinity is too much of a reach. Instead, think about moving to a slightly better place than you are. What we're looking for is an improvement in the quality of our subjective experience. We don't need to go from rejection and defeat all the way through to being inspired by divinity to get what we're looking for. We just need to move away from where we are to some degree. So the idea of divinity will seem too far away when we're feeling that way. Instead, try to move to a more intermediate state. So use a self-reflection pathway to reconnect with your goals and your ideals. Goals refers to personal achievement, and your ideals refers to personal development. So it's important that when we choose these goals that they connect with both head and heart. So we intellectually recognize that these goals and these ideals are in line with my nature. They are things that are worthwhile for me to achieve. That's the head part, the cognitive. And the heart part is simply, I want to achieve it. I feel like I want to get up and do that. It's not enough for just one or the other. Both must be there. So understanding where this suffering is coming from is a key part of this. Anytime we are suffering, it's because we are involved in the circumstance. And one of the key elements is the questioner is bringing up here is that of relationships and work. We get involved in our work, we get involved in our relationships, and that involvement is what causes us to suffer. It's not the experiences per se. When we get involved, we develop attachments and expectations. So when we're involved in something, we are lost in our own thoughts, past or future. So when I am in the circumstance and I am involved, perhaps I'm always grasping after some future that is not yet born. Perhaps I'm always thinking about some past that I want to get back to. When I've been rejected or defeated, I keep thinking back to, what could I have done? What should I have done? If only I had done this differently. So the thoughts are going back there on their own. It's not that you are choosing to think forward or backwards. If you're choosing it, then you're actually in the present. What's happening is that the mind is flowing on its own towards the past or the future. What's happening then is that we are relating to those projections through the ego. I wish this had happened, I wish this had not happened. We have a whole host of expectations that are not being met by the environment, and it's those expectations that lead to suffering. So what do we need to do then? What we need to do is to get out of that involvement with past and future, get back into the present moment, and we need to get away from the ego. These are two things. So what we need to do is to get back to our goals and our ideals using a self-reflection pathway. So I'm going to go through one here, which is one that I prepared earlier. You should be creating your own self-reflection pathway. This is just an example of one that might work. You should be looking for pathways that work for you, that get you where you want to go. And how will you know that you've got to the place you need to get to? There is that confluence, that blend of head and heart in the present towards some sort of meaningful action. So we'll get there. First thing to ask ourselves in this self-reflection pathway is, what am I experiencing? Physical, emotional, and intellectual. There will be a component from each of these dimensions in the experience. A feeling of rejection, a feeling of defeat, a feeling of loss will also have a somatic or a physical component to it. It might feel like a physical heaviness. It might feel like an anxious knot in your stomach, a tightness in your chest, a beating fast of your heart, a strangled breath, anything. So ask this question, what am I experiencing? There'll be an intellectual component to it as well. If I feel a sense of failure, there'll be a narrative, there'll be a message, there'll be a meaning to it as well. What do you say to yourself? Oh, I'm such a failure, I can't get anything right. Everything I start ends up in failure. This is the intellectual side of it. So what am I experiencing? And it's really important that you sit with that. Don't just sort of glance at it askance from a couple of arms lengths distance away and give it a label and move on. Get to know it intimately. So don't try to force it away. Don't try to run away from it. Sit with it and be with it consciously. An example of this sort of thing is sitting in cold water. Okay, so you may be familiar with a whole host of wellness trends that are centered around cold water immersion. So now, whatever the benefits for the body might be, the analogy here is you are consciously putting yourself into something which is unpleasant. You take a few bags of ice, put them in the bathtub, and sit in freezing water for 3 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Why put yourself into that discomfort? Because there are some benefits that come from it. You're not trying to run away from the experience of the cold. You're not trying to analyze it away or distance yourself from it. You are sitting with it. You're fully immersed in the experience. So in a similar way, whatever you're experiencing, immerse yourself in it. Now, this is not wallowing in it. Wallowing is when it happens, but you're not consciously choosing it. What you're doing when you go through this process of experiencing is becoming acquainted with yourself. So this is the first aspect. What am I experiencing? Then we can start to move into a bit more of analysis. What was the trigger? So the trigger refers to the thing that created the experience from outside of you. The loss, the defeat, the rejection, the words that the person said, the rejection letter that I got, whatever it happens to be. The trigger is not the cause. The trigger is the thing that impinged upon the cause and gave rise to the effect. It's a really important distinction to make. So when you're analysing the trigger, create a balanced view of it. What you need to do is to call out where the environment is in the wrong. So if someone has rejected you, you might be able to identify where that person did not act appropriately in their treatment of you. What they should have done if they were more mature. What they should have done to stay in line with the values of your relationship. Call it out. Treat yourself like a third person. Imagine you were looking at the situation from your friend's perspective. Now, what would a friend say to you about what the environment has done? The job mistreated you. It didn't pay you what you were worth. It didn't give you the recognition you deserve. So intelligently call out where the environment contributed towards this in a way that shows their violation of what ought to have been. And on the other side of it, advocate for the trigger. Someone has treated you in a way which is a violation of the principles of your relationship. But now imagine it's that person's friend, advocating on their behalf. Yes, but they were also struggling with something, and the environment that you had both created wasn't conducive for them to be honest. So it's understandable that they had a hard time being honest with you. Okay, so what are you doing here? You're advocating on behalf of the trigger, and you're also calling out the legitimate grievances that you might have against the trigger. A balanced view. Either one of these alone is unbalanced. If you spend all your time criticizing where the trigger was wrong, you might be right about what you're saying, but you're getting into the blame game and not useful for the goal you're trying to achieve. And if you spend all your time advocating for the trigger, we're all just doing the best we can, nobody's perfect, etc., then you undermine your own position. You're treating yourself as if you were inferior. We want objectivity. Treat yourself like you would a stranger. So, what am I experiencing? What was the trigger for it? Next, what was the cause? The cause is the internal thing that the trigger struck, which then modified into the effect. So here, the answer would be according to your own introspection. The further investigation, the further exploration would be according to your own knowledge of yourself and more introspection. So you might ask, well, what was I expecting? I was expecting due recognition for my work. I was expecting that person to be straight up and honest with me. The mind develops expectations when we are involved in our likes and dislikes. So what was I expecting from the environment? What does this mean about my mind's preference? I have a liking, I have an attachment, I have a need or a desire for external recognition. I have a liking, a need, attachment, desire for people to always tell me the truth. Then question, is that reasonable? You might want it. Be careful what you wish for, by the way. You might get it. But is it reasonable? Do you always tell the truth in all situations to everybody? Just because somebody asks you a question, are you compelled to tell them the truth? Are there times where it's reasonable for you to withhold the truth? Do you always give recognition to others? Are those who are worthy of recognition always receiving it? What is the way of the world? Don't look at the world through what you would like to be. Start to look at the world the way that it is. So what you're doing here is understanding the cause. And as you start to see that, I was expecting to always be told absolute truth. It's really actually not that reasonable. Your expectation starts to loosen. The feeling of being aggrieved may also start to loosen. Then you can take it a step further. If this was the cause that modified into the effect of me feeling rejected, etc., what is the truth, or what is the piece of knowledge that I need to understand more deeply? What is the wisdom that if I had, it means this suffering would not arise? People are always managing their perception by others. the way we dress, the way we speak. We're managing others' perception of us. Human beings function in this way. Now, if I understood that deeply, if I understood how the ego functions, then my expectations that others always give me the recognition I need, always tell me the truth, would fall away. Once you've found this piece of knowledge, this piece of wisdom, sit with it, reflect on it, think about it, contemplate on it. Let it seep into your bones in the same way that when you sit into a cold water bath, the cold seeps into your bones. Don't just cognitively understand it, feel it. What am I experiencing? What was the trigger? What was the cause? Now, what are my goals and my ideals here? So once again, the sorts of questions that you ask as part of this package need to be your own. They need to resonate with you. They need to trace their way back to your goals and to your ideals so that you start to feel a sense of purpose. What can I learn about myself through this? I have a strong desire for recognition. That I have powerful expectations to be told the truth. That when I find that people are misleading me, I'm deeply hurt. I'm learning this about myself. What do I want to achieve? Well, I want to achieve recognition. I want to achieve a certain level of social status, to be seen as someone who is accomplished, competent, etc. So look for your personal goals here. We haven't gone into it here, but I'll reiterate the point that I made earlier, that it's important that these personal goals have been well chosen. They are in line with your nature, and your intellect recognizes that they are legitimate human endeavors. And that's up for you to decide. But don't just stop with your personal goals. Because remember, we're trying to get out of the ego. Recognizing your legitimate personal goals is movement in that direction. But now we start to move beyond the personal and into the spiritual. Who do I want to be? What does growth and maturity look like? And who can I help and how? So these are your ideals. Who do I want to be is talking about a more mature you. So you could relate it to the situation that you're currently in. Well, a more mature me receives rejection, allows myself to feel, and then I connect with what can I learn about this rejection, how can I move forward, modify what I've done, and get closer to my goals. That's what maturity looks like. It doesn't deny my feelings, but it doesn't linger on them either. And a mature person has optimism. Optimism isn't feeling good about every situation. Optimism is recognizing that better days are ahead. Because my experience is my responsibility. With the right values, the right attitude, and the right behavior, my experience will improve. So I receive the stimulus, I react this way, and then I respond in that way. That's what maturity looks like for me. And the last aspect of the ideal is, who can I help? Where do I have an opportunity to serve? So our ideal has these two aspects. It grows beyond our current level of thinking, our current level of maturity, and it improves the environment that I'm in. What am I experiencing? What was the trigger? What was the cause? What are my goals and my ideals here? And how can I act towards them right now? So we're getting out of the past and into the present. The most tangible part of your personality is your physical body. It's your body that acts. So get into action. What's one thing that I can do here and now while I'm feeling myself under this burden to move towards that goal? It doesn't matter how small it is. What's meaningful is the fact that you are choosing an action that takes you towards where you want to go. Everything that we've covered so far is very individual. It's just you. It's very solitary. It's not reasonable to expect that you can pick yourself up and put yourself back on track without any help whatsoever. Sometimes that part of us that doesn't want to do this, that part of us just wants to be seen and heard. So talk to someone, whether that person is a personal contact or a professional. Relate your story. Explain what happened. The receipt, reaction, response. The way you're feeling, the thoughts you're having. Allow that person to give their own perspective, to reflect back to you what they are hearing, ask you questions. The fact that you are being recognized for what you're going through can often alleviate that part of you that holds you back from doing the thing that you should be doing to move out of it. And so the other aspect which is related to this is community in general. We know from research that being isolated is highly detrimental to your mental health. If you're feeling upset, don't isolate yourself from society. Find an environment to offload it. It's an environment of supportive people who come together for the purpose of sharing space. Offload. They're not there to solve your problems, but the burden that you feel from the experiences can be lifted. So don't underestimate the value in just offloading authentically with vulnerability what you are going through. You want someone who is mature enough to see what's going on and to know how to relate. Same with the communities that you enter into. Not everyone has the ability to hold that kind of space where you can be open, honest, authentic about what you're going through. Some people feel uncomfortable. But the point here is connect with other minds and intellects, with other humans. Gratitude. So gratitude can be a bit of a double-edged sword, but rather than taking a deficit-based approach, this is what's wrong, take a strengths-based approach. Well, this is what I have. Well, what do I have to be thankful for at least? At very least, you have, from this experience, more information about yourself. You're learning about yourself, about the environment, about the sort of needs that you have. Well, at least I'm beginning to learn. And at least I have someone to talk to. Whatever it is, whatever comes to you. You can journal. It can be an invocation that you do at the beginning of every day or whatever. Again, it's got to work for you, the integration of it. I mentioned toxic positivity, toxic optimism. Don't let gratitude become a way of suppressing what you're really feeling. So especially in the field of spirituality and self-development, there's a sort of judgment or criticism leveled at people who feel bad. You're attached. You're stuck in the world. You're not very evolved if you're suffering that much. And so in order to not appear to others and to ourselves that way, we cover it up. I'm not really frustrated by all this. At least I've got a job. Okay, now that's cognitively true. But inside, at the level of your mind, it's absolutely not true. You're not really feeling grateful for your job. It's the job that is causing you so much distress. So don't lie to yourself, don't lie to your mind. Use gratitude as a way of exhausting tension, not as a way of packing more in. And if it's divinity you want, spirituality is self-sufficiency. It's being okay with what is. It's the ability to moment accept what is. To accept the present moment. So don't try and escape it. What am I feeling? What is the current condition? Anxiety, worry, fear, sense of loss. This is the current condition. Open yourself up to it. Create an enormous space for it to reside. Don't try to push it away with analysis. Don't try to run away from it with objectivity. Be with it. These dark flowers bloom in my mind. What enables them? What's the life force that allows these dark flowers to bloom one day, and the next day these beautiful flowers of joy and gratitude? What's that singular underlying power, that force, that energy that enlivens the black rose and the red rose? Ascharya, I don't know. But it's there. And I am the space in which it exists. This is the current condition. The drama of human life. So there's a quote that I often bring up from the text or the book, The Last Temptation of Christ. I won't go through the scenario, except to say that Christ is walking through the desert, through cities, and finds himself at the door of a place he didn't want to be. He suddenly recognizes where he was, and he says, "Thank you, Lord, for bringing me where I did not want to come. Thy will be done, not mine." Now, if you can get there, then all this other analysis and goals and ideal stuff, you can bypass it. But if you can get there, it's very easy to put those words into your mind and to suppress what you're actually experiencing. In which case, these spiritual ideas, these spiritual concepts, act to suppress you. They don't release you or relieve you. So these ideas, as beautiful as they sound when we talk about them, they are dangerous if wrongly applied. Back to the question. When we face rejection, defeats, and the pounding of inferior ego, how do we pick ourselves up with knowledge and devotion? So the knowledge we talked about, it's going through that reflection, it's coming to know who you are. The devotion is the humility, to recognize I need help. Whether you can give that to yourself or whether you need it from others. During these times, it's hard to see divinity as you're caught up, involved, and take rejection and inferiority as truth. That's right, it's hard to see divinity. So if it's not working for you, don't try. Take a step towards it, but take a step towards it into a better part of the world. When this happens with someone you care for, the rejection is unexpected and seems harder. How does one face this? It's much the same. One key element that we've only just touched on, which I'll extend a little bit here, is to recognize what your needs are and to recognize what your attachments are. When someone that we care for rejects us, we take it harder because we are attached. So recognizing your attachment is a key part of this. So we did cover that in the self-reflection. What was the cause? What was I expecting? The mind's preference and attachments and desires. So When someone that we care for rejects us, yes, the suffering is because of our attachments and expectations, but that doesn't mean that the thing we are attached to is illegitimate. I need an honest, open, authentic relationship. That's what I'm attached to, I should say. Is that reasonable? Yes, it's entirely reasonable. It's a legitimate human need. So just because we desire it, just because the ego wants it, just because we have an attachment towards it, doesn't mean we should not be pursuing it. So how do you face this? Introspecting and refining your understanding of what your legitimate needs are. And then recognizing that that person was unable to fulfill them. Now, if that person isn't at the level of maturity, or doesn't have the nature, or simply doesn't have the inclination to provide what you need, you must choose yourself first. Fulfilling your needs is your obligation. It's not egocentric. So it's a matter of choosing yourself rather than choosing your attachments. Give yourself what you need. All of this is centered around your goals and your ideals, and specifically your ideal of choosing your own mental peace. That's your key objective.